I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, and welcome. It's June 9th, mid-afternoon here in Israel, and I had originally planned to speak about one of our new absurd plans in Gaza, but how could I possibly skip the end of the Freedom Flotilla for Gaza that took place this morning? And so before I get critical with government decision-making, let me start by high grades. The handling of Greta and company and her one boat wonder selfie flotilla was performed brilliantly by the policymakers, the decision makers, the planners, and of course the naval commandos who went on board. Nobody was injured and took over, handing out water and pastrami sandwiches with plenty of photographers on hand to show everyone happily receiving them. And despite Greta claiming that she was kidnapped by the IDF, she looked really, really happy to see that pastrami sandwich, given that apparently they've been eating the aid that they were bringing to Gaza since they ran out of food along the way. So a well-planned, well-executed operation, ending the current farce of the break the Israeli siege for Gaza operation, by the way, funded by Hamas, as it turns out, one of their branch offices in Europe. Not surprising, of course. And even though I'm sure all of our media friends like CNN and The Times and The Guardian and BBC, of course, will write it up as a horrendous violation of international law, humanitarian law, maybe even genocide, because you don't have to kill anybody to be genocidal. It was really very well done, shut down nicely, and as a grand finale, apparently when they get to Ashdod, the activists will have a screening of the October 7th uncensored horror movie. We'll see what they have to say about that. I hope that when it's shown to them, they're filmed and their reactions are filmed as well, so we can get a sense of really what's going on in the minds of these people. In any event, that's the good news, and there isn't all that much good news out there these days, so a little bit is always something nice to have. But what I really wanted to talk about today is a new harebrained scheme that came up and was reported last week. It was announced or made public by Avigdor Lieberman, member of Knesset, former minister, that a decision was made by the Israeli leadership to arm a Palestinian militia in Gaza as a counterweight to Hamas. And Prime Minister Netanyahu gave an interview on it or a talk, and he said, well, what could be bad? They're against Hamas. We'll give them guns, and life is going to be beautiful. I'm paraphrasing. So here's a rather good example of what could seem like a good idea if you give it about a millisecond of thought. But if you go even a little bit beyond that, the possibilities of disaster here are truly beyond belief. And you would think, and you would be wrong if you thought so, that after many attempts, not only by Israel, but by others, to try to pull this kind of an operation off in the past, all of which fail, and in some cases fail miserably, somebody would stop and remember Einstein's famous dictum that insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So let's start with the general and work our way down to the specific. What could be bad about arming another militia? Well, what we're trying to do is impose some sort of order in Gaza. We're not nowhere near it, but that would be an implicit ultimate goal. War is really at its high end of strategy about imposing your will upon the other side. Imposing will means imposing your sense of order. See note in the grand case of World War II and the Allies over Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Go to the American Civil War, the Union's imposition of its will over the Confederacy. And even if it's not in the grand takeover, use the American Revolution as an example, and the imposition of American will over the British in the area of the United States. So even though chaos is going on, and during wartime, chaos and anarchy are part and parcel of the deal, increasing it does not work to Israel's benefit. That's first. Second, the idea of finding some other violent organization and using it as a counterpoint, as I said, has been tried before. In some cases, somewhat naively. We can use an example of the Americans supporting Ho Chi Minh against the Japanese back in World War II. See how well that worked out in the long run. Worked against the Japanese, kind of, sort of. But supporting all sorts of future potential enemies and giving them weapons and the opportunity to improve their use of them really seems like a bad idea. Now, if we go back a few decades, when Fatah was ruling high-handedly over Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, the Israeli leadership, in those days labor government, had an interesting idea. Let's promote another organization that will be a counterpoint to Fatah. What could possibly go wrong? They're a social organization, they're a philanthropic organization, they're a humanitarian organization, they're a religious organization. It's called Hamas. And while Israel didn't create Hamas, and it certainly didn't build it up, it allowed it to operate and was very benign toward its operation in the early years, simply because it was seen as a counterpoint to Fatah and would keep Fatah in line. As it turned out, of course, Frankenstein's monster took over throughout Fatah, and here we are dealing with what we're dealing with. Somebody neglected to read the bold print of the Hamas charter, in which it said it wanted to destroy Israel and wipe out the Jews. But hey, they're against Fatah. What could possibly go wrong? And now we come to this new organization, a bunch of criminals to begin with, Gaza-based Bedouin who basically made their claim to fame in running guns and drugs and women and all sorts of good stuff like that. And along the way are being funded by Fatah, which tells you they're not exactly a Western liberal kind of organization. One of their leaders was actually involved in the Gilad Shalit capture affair back in the day. They have fired rockets into Israel, independent of Hamas. So, once again, what could be bad? They don't like Hamas. Well, I think that this is a glaring example, another glaring example of Western thinking not understanding that the people who are against the bad guys are not necessarily the good guys. In this case, we have a small, chaotic terrorist organization completely operating on their own, not under control. To be fair, giving them weapons doesn't exactly turn them from unarmed to armed. It simply turns them from armed to better armed. And I guess there is some sort of poetic justice in giving them Kalashnikovs and the like that were taken from Hamas over the past year plus of fighting. But nonetheless, as it was pointedly asked, how do we know that at one point they won't turn these weapons on Israeli soldiers? The answer by the government was, well, we can't really be sure of that. So here we see uh, a very good and unfortunate example of a government that has lost a vision of where it's going. The army is fighting as usual at a very, very high level. I'd like to say brilliantly, making mistakes as all armies do, and suffering casualties as a result both of combat and of the mistakes. And once again, every casualty is a tragedy, and mistakes shouldn't happen, but they do, and they're part of life in general, and certainly part of combat. But the translation of absolute victory, which I absolutely support as a concept, but the translation of absolute victory from a concept to a strategic objective with measurable, articulatable goals has been lost. We could argue, and I think it would be fair to argue, that a year ago that would be premature to try to figure that out. Now it is no longer premature. The IDF and security services have essentially eliminated Hamas's leadership in Gaza, military and political. They've reduced Hamas to a rather desperate guerrilla organization. And when I say desperate, I mean organizationally desperate. They still have fighters. They still have fighters who are willing to die for the cause, and certainly able and willing to kill for the cause. But now that we really can see that the IDF should be on the home stretch of this operation, it should be much clearer how we're going to measure victory and what the final moves, the final steps are going to be. Arming a potentially dangerous militia to help balance off against Hamas is certainly not the way to do it. So, with that in mind, we'll keep watching that and see if these militiamen who fired rockets at Israel in the past suddenly turn around and become part of the Zionist organization. Don't hold your breath. But in the meantime, here we are, and the fight continues slowly, methodically, and surely as the IDF drives through the remnants of Hamas's force in Gaza. So on that note, stay tuned, stay connected, stay safe. Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.